Good evening, and welcome to the 2022 Wentzville School District Board of Education Election Town Hall. Tonight, questions submitted by you will be answered by the upcoming school board election candidates. My name is Sean Bruce, and I am a senior at Liberty High School.
And I'm Paige Bostick, also a senior at Liberty High School. Sean and I will be your moderators for this evening's town hall. This event is produced, directed, and assembled by our team of students, sponsored by LHS Publications.
Before we begin, please be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at WSD-BOE Town Hall for all information regarding the town hall, recaps of tonight's event, and election updates.
This evening's questions are based upon the responses from a survey sent out to the constituents of the Wentzville School District. The most popular topics from the survey, as well as each candidate's campaign platforms, were considered in the creations of tonight's questions.
In part one of tonight's meeting, all candidates will be asked 3 general questions and 1 individual question specific to their platform. Following the 4th round of questions, there will be a 15-minute break before we move on to part 2, where we will ask viewer-submitted questions.
Throughout part 1 of tonight's events, you can submit questions of your own through the link at the bottom of your screen. Please keep all questions appropriate and relevant, and be sure to signify the candidate your question is directed towards.
Student event organizers will be selecting questions from this survey during the break, and these will be asked of the candidates during part 2 of tonight's town hall. Again, this link can be found at the bottom of your screen.
We will now introduce our 2022 WSD School Board candidates. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Each candidate has 60 seconds to introduce themselves before the first round of questions begins. We will start with Mr. Donald Looney.
Hello, my name is Donald Looney. She said I'm a Wentzville School Board candidate. I've lived in the community since '98. My youngest son is graduating from Holt here in May. Want to be a part of the Wentzville School District Board of Education. It's my second attempt at a seat. I would like to bring back some stability and get the focus back towards running the business of education and elevation of our students. Thank you for having me. I think that's all I got.
Thank you, Mr. Looney. Mrs. Katie Lysak, you may begin.
Hi, my name is Katie Lysak. My husband and I have lived in the Wentzville School District for nearly 17 years. We moved here for the community, and we have stayed because of the schools. We have 2 children who attend elementary school in the district. I work as the executive director of a resource center where I specialize in identifying needs and connecting my clients with resources. I work closely with many advocacy groups focusing on early childhood and child sexual exploitation. Thank you for organizing and producing this opportunity to reach the community. For the past 3 school years, I have been attending school board meetings both virtually and in person. My interest began as a concerned parent and has now grown to know the necessity of having individuals on the board who truly have the best interests of students in mind. My commitment to the Wentzville School District is to be a well-informed, collaborative board member who advocates for all students, staff, and stakeholders. I look forward to using my experience as an advocate here in the Wentzville School District.
Thank you, Mrs. Lysak. Mr. J.J. Sufco, you may begin.
Hi, my name is J.J. Sufco. My wife and I have 2 children that attend Boone Trail Elementary. I've been a resident in the Wentzville School District since 2003. I have regularly attended board meetings the last 2 years, and in those 2 years, have become an advocate for student and staff safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sufco. Secretary Dale Shaper, you may begin.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to say thank you to the Liberty High School students for hosting this event this evening to give the candidates an opportunity to come forward. A little about myself, Dale Shaper. I am a lifelong resident of the Wentzville School District. I graduated in 1966 from Wentzville, what was then only one high school in our district. My wife is a graduate, as well as our 3 children. I have 2 grandchildren attending the school district at this time. One's a senior at Timberland. The other attends Boone Trail Elementary. I've served on the board for 15 years. There's been much growth, many challenges, nothing like the last 2 years, so I will say that. I look forward to serving longer. I've seen our school district kind of go full circle from when I came on the board. We have to approach at this time to keep our reserves, to keep our district strong.
Thank you, Secretary Shaper. Mr. John Kalin, you may begin.
Hi, my name is John Kalin. My family and I have lived in the Wentzville School District since 2008. I'm a former U.S. Air Force officer and a current supervisor at the Defense Department. And in that career, I've learned how to lead people, manage teams, accomplish a mission, and how to be a good steward of taxpayer dollars. As the father of two kiddos who attend Stone Creek Elementary and the husband of an educator in a nearby school district, I've seen what teachers have gone through over the last 2 years, and I understand what we need to do to support them. Lastly, I have a master's degree in information systems management and a graduate certificate in data science. So as a data scientist, I know how to use data in innovative ways to come up with optimal solutions to a variety of problems. I want to use my nearly 20-year career to serve the citizens, the students, and the taxpayers of the Wentzville School District. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kalin. Dr. Julie Scott, you may begin.
Hi, I'm Julie Scott. I am a resident of Lake St. Louis, and I, along with my husband, have two children who attend Green Tree Elementary in the Wentzville School District. And I have been a healthcare provider here in our community for the last 11 years. In addition, I also do teach at Maryville University in a master's nursing program. And I also own a healthcare writing business. So I have a lot of skills and I've learned a lot of things over the years that I think would really serve me well on the Board of Education, namely things such as effective collaboration and respectful communication, as well as how to use evidence-based decision-making to better the students, all of the students, and also not to forget the teachers and staff members as well.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Earlier today, candidate Ms. Sandy Garber informed us that she would not be able to join us tonight. Now, we will move on to the first round of questions. You will each have 90 seconds to answer during this round.
For all rounds of questions tonight, we will go in a pre-randomized order. We will call on you when it is your turn to speak. Here is your first question.
Responses to our first surveys asked questions pertaining to the well-being of our staff. Where do you feel the district has succeeded in providing teachers with a work environment favorable to their mental health, and where has it fallen short? Our first candidate to answer will be Dr. Scott. Dr. Scott, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. I think that where we have some room to improve, some opportunities to improve, is to feel that the teachers and the staff of the district really feel supported by the Board of Education. I've spoken with a lot of teachers and support staff throughout this campaign, and a very common theme was that they've been really feeling neglected and uncared for by the Board of Education in the way that they've been making decisions that have really affected them negatively. So I think just having a supportive Board of Education would be a huge first step in making sure that that is something that they feel supported by and feel like they want to come to work every day. I think something that is done well is the way that the current Board of Education took in input from current, members of the community, as well as the educators and the staff members in their search for a new superintendent. Hopefully that was, a good collaborative effort that helped make their decision a little bit easier to see what was really going to benefit the teachers and the support staff of the district. I think that this collaboration between the Board of Education and the support staff and the educators just needs to be mindful that this district is made up of many, many different employees, and every one of them is very important to our district.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Our next candidate to answer will be Mr. Kalin. Mr. Kalin, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. So great question. As far as successes, I would say that protecting plan time, increased collaboration through the late starts so that teams can actually get together, teams of teachers can do professional development and curriculum development with the rest of their teams. And also that the district offers robust leadership development, professional development programs. I think those are all successes, and those are things that need to continue or grow. As far as challenges, I would say the chief challenge that I've heard in speaking with educators in the district is changing the culture of the district from one where teachers feel mistrusted to one where they feel that they are empowered to teach, they are trusted to do their jobs, they are equipped and resourced to do their jobs. And I think that culture starts with the Board of Education and the way that the board works with the superintendent. And so I advocate for a partnership relationship with the superintendent, and I would model that all the way down to change the culture. And lastly, in my last 10 seconds, I would also look at ways that we can expand career growth opportunities for educators who want to stay in the district but grow their career professionally. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kalin. Our next candidate to answer will be Mrs. Lysak. Mrs. Lysak, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. The board recently made a wonderful decision to allow teachers who live out of the district to enroll their children here in the district with them. I think that was a great decision that the board made. I'd like to note that teachers are not the only staff in the buildings. We know that. Paras, IAs, cafeteria, and custodial staff are all just as important to the success of the district. Support and health of all staff should be just as important as that of the teachers. And I think that balancing teaching schedules for planning and preparation is critically important, especially at the elementary level. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lysak. Our next candidate to answer will be Mr. Sufco. Mr. Sufco, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. For the well-being of our staff, what we need to do is get back to the basics and creating a safe and positive learning environment for the teachers. We have student violence and unreported incidents that go on throughout our schools all the time, and we need to allow the teachers to manage their classrooms. Getting back to discipline will help manage those classrooms and help those teachers actually have better experiences every day when they come into school. I would also say that what has been done well is that our teachers love being teachers and they're great at what they do, but they need support from the superintendent down regarding the student violence that goes on in the schools every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sufco. The next candidate to answer will be Secretary Shaper. Secretary Shaper, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. As a setting board member, I've always made myself available to any staff, whether it's certified or support staff, to hear any of their concerns. One thing is, though, in our classrooms, as we're talking about that, we need to support our teachers. We need to provide them with the tools that they need and let them be educators. We need to address our discipline within our schools. This has been a concern, even as far as 5 years ago, is with our staff. So we must support them, give them the tools that they need, and let them do their job. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Shaper. Our next candidate to answer will be Mr. Looney. Mr. Looney, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. So I got 90 seconds. That's quite a bit. Would you mind reading the question back so I can make sure I capture what it is that you're actually asking me?
Where do you feel the district has succeeded in providing teachers with a work environment favorable to their mental health? Mm-hmm. Where has it fallen short?
Okay. So this kind of speaks to my why for even wanting to be a part of the Board of Education. I kind of noticed a few years back that we were losing a lot of quality, talented teachers with tenure who had been around in education for a very long time. And I was kind of looking to see where we could put some stopgaps in to prevent that from happening, right? After looking through it, I noticed that a part of it had to do with the exponential growth of our community, and a lot of teachers were just overwhelmed. And then once I kind of was able to pseudo-diagnose that, we ran into everything with the pandemic and, all the other things that came about there. So those issues really weren't able to be addressed. I think that from the perspective of the Board of Education, the best thing that we could do is first listen to our teachers and understand what it is that they actually need so we can address those mental health needs, right? And then just reach out to the community and ask for an opportunity to recover from everything that's gone on in the last 2 years. Because as I've said many times before, I feel like teachers are more than just that. Not only are they caregivers, but they are the treasurers of our most precious asset, which is the students that enter those buildings every day. So we got to find ways to fortify their efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Looney. This concludes our first round of general questions. We will now move on to our next general question.
Candidates, here is your next question. In January, the board voted not to retain The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison in Wentzville libraries on the grounds of having no academic value. What criteria should a book meet to be deemed academically valuable to the student body? We will begin with Mr. Sufco. Mr. Sufco, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. If a book violates school policies, it shouldn't be on the shelves. If a book doesn't violate any school policies and consistent with that, it should be able to remain on the shelves. And the problem with our school district is we are not following policies. So I would have not retained that book based on the existing school policies that we have in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sufco. Our next candidate to answer will be Secretary Shaper. Secretary Shaper, you have 90 seconds.
Yes, The Bluest Eye came to us along with 4 other books beside that for review. 3 books were pulled by Dr. Kane or the appropriate staff and was not reviewed. I had the opportunity to sit on the review process for The Bluest Eye. I felt the book was too play-by-play, not in collective terms. It is an adult book. It was the bestseller on the week of February 6th by St. Louis bookstores. So from that, I understand the context of the book and what the drive of the book was. It discussed oppression. And depression was in the time from in the Depression area up until World War II. That oppression is still here today with us. But I did not feel that that book was proper for our libraries and should not be retained. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Shaper. The next candidate to answer will be Mr. Kalin. Mr. Kalin, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. So the question dealt with what is academically viable. I think that's the term that you used. And so, in my opinion, the viability of a book like The Bluest Eye is in letting students experience something that they may never experience themselves, to have and to encounter and to engage and to wrestle with difficult, complex, challenging situations and topics. I've read the book. It was a very difficult book to read. And having read it, I will encourage and let my children read that book when they are in high school, because I want to have that conversation with them. I want to talk to them about the contents of that book as their parent. And so that's where I see the academic viability, is giving students a safe space and a safe place to encounter very difficult, challenging subjects so that they can learn, so that they can understand what people who aren't like them are going through, because there's a very good chance somewhere in their career they will encounter someone who may have gone through a similar situation, and they will be better equipped to be a better friend, coworker, person, human because of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kalin. The next candidate to answer will be Mr. Looney. Mr. Looney, you have 90 seconds.
So, very good question. And I think that this kind of speaks to the differences in the students in our district. Everyone kind of learns differently, right? And it's kind of hard to assess what obstacles they may face that could bring about challenges in that learning process, right? We also want to develop members of society who can offer a positive contribution to the world once they leave here, right? I feel like the Wentzville School District has done a great job of that. I'm proud of what they've done with my own children thus far. I think that as far as the academic viability of a book like that, it gives a little insight and perspective to a different walk of life that many of our students in our district may not have experienced for one reason or the other, right? I think it speaks to a lot of inherited traumas that some of the residents of our district deal with, right? And so allowing students to have a peek into that kind of perspective is definitely academically viable. It definitely helps them become more compassionate members to our society. And we never know who's going to be impacted in a positive way just by understanding that kind of perspective. I feel like I'm going to ramble, so I'm going to stop there. But I definitely think the book definitely did. And I think we have to trust our parents and our school district to decide where those books should be read.
Thank you, Mr. Looney. Our next candidate to answer will be Dr. Scott. Dr. Scott, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. So with not retaining the bluest eye, and there was all of this controversy over what value it brought to the district. What value did it have being in our library? I think one of the things that was lost was the fact that somebody found it valuable. A librarian who is incredibly well educated, who is responsible for putting together these libraries to benefit our students, have found value in that material. So I think that just completely disregarding the fact that there is literary value to these books, even though the material is difficult, even though it can be difficult to read and it might be a little bit uncomfortable, that those books are challenging in a good way. These help produce better adults. These help produce more well-rounded students. These help produce students who can think critically, who can have empathy. And I think that was a bit lost in the fact that, some of the pages were a bit uncomfortable. So I think that the academic value of a book that is uncomfortable is there if a librarian and somebody who's well educated on how to put together these educational materials, or if it's an AP literature teacher, or if it's some other educator in the district, if they find that book to be valuable, I think that it's important that we let our students read it, or at least have access to it.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Scott. The final candidate to answer will be Mrs. Lysak. Mrs. Lysak, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Academic value is a subjective statement. I think books like The Bluest Eye, they have a place at home if parents choose to allow their children to read books like that. Family culture, as Mr. Kalin touched on, is an extremely important thing to preserve. However, books that carry so much controversy, I believe, should really be left up to parents as to whether or not their children are exposed to that or allowed to read that in an academic setting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lysak. Candidates, here is your third and final general question. What specific criteria would you use to determine whether or not a district program should receive taxpayer support?
First up is Secretary Shaper. Secretary Shaper, you have 90 seconds.
Could I ask you to repeat that again, please?
What specific criteria would you use to determine whether or not a district's program should receive taxpayer support?
Well, all of our programs receive taxpayer support within our school. Our funding comes locally, about 58% comes locally, with about 38% from the state. So in a sense, I guess all programs that we have are supported by taxpayers. The other 5%, that is federal funds and others on that. So the determination is the value that our students receive from the program and how it helps them post-graduation to be more successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Shaper. Next up will be Mrs. Lysak. You have 90 seconds.
Can you repeat the question again, please?
What specific criteria would you use to determine whether or not a district program should receive taxpayer support?
I think criteria strictly goes back to policy that was set by previous boards. If a policy needs to be amended, that is completely the job of a current board. Just echoing the comments of Mr. Shaper, everything in the district is tax funded by property taxes, mostly by families living in the community, individuals living in the community. But just going back to policy, that's completely a policy issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lysak. Our next candidate is Mr. Looney. Mr. Looney, you have 90 seconds.
So I kind of think that with a lot of the changes that we faced in the last couple of years, this question sort of speaks to that. And I think that the criteria would be is, are we as a district with our staff and educators in a position to introduce that type of curriculum or program into our system? And what do we need to do to get in a place to where we can do that, right? I think that would be, we would have to look at our policy and make the adjustments necessary to afford those benefits to our students. And then really it comes down to the students and how will this benefit them now and going forward, right? And we have to start taking a proactive approach to it and looking at the long-term effects of everything that we're doing and bringing forth to our students. As far as what criteria, I think we have a wonderful staff of administrators down at our central office who head up different departments and things of that nature. So as a board member myself, I think I would rely on their expertise and just trust the decisions that they make with that. And then it would be upon me and the other members of the board, once elected, to make a decision if we could bring that program into our school district.
Thank you, Mr. Looney. The next candidate to answer is Mr. Kalin. Mr. Kalin, you have 90 seconds.
Thanks. So I have I'll use a 3 criteria rubric on whether a program should have taxpayer support. 1, does it support student outcomes and student academic achievement? And if there are multiple competing proposals, which proposal serves the most or the greatest number of students in their academic achievement? Number 2, does the program enable staff to do their jobs better, whether that's teachers, support staff, anyone who's employed by the district? Does it enable them to do their jobs better? And 3, can we afford it? As a public servant in my career, I have to be very cognizant of whether or not we can afford something or not. I have a lot of things I'd like to do at my work, but I'm constrained fiscally by my budget and the taxpayers and being a good steward of that. So I think those are my 3 criteria. If all of those are yes, I would support it. My 4th kind of criteria that I would use to prioritize programs is through our CSIP, the Comprehensive School Improvement Program. Is the program supporting a CSIP goal? And if so, which goal is it? And that's how we prioritize whether or not programs should get taxpayer funding or not, in my opinion. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kalin. Next up is Mr. Sufco. Mr. Sufco, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. I would expect the superintendent and the cabinet to make a presentation and recommendations to the school board. And based on those recommendations, they've done the research and they can let us know. And one of the most important things for me is, if we're going to spend any money on any program, is does it affect academic performance in our school district? And if it has a positive impact, I'm a yes vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sufco. The final candidate to answer is Dr. Scott. Dr. Scott, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. A lot of the already mentioned criteria I do agree with in terms of policy. Obviously, that has to be a part of it. The budget, obviously, you have to have the money to pay for that and see kind of where it fits, what has to give in order to make this particular program fit. And also, I do think that it does need to be a priority for the students as well as the staff and the support, the educators. However, one thing that I would like to say a little bit differently than some of the others have already mentioned is that I think you have to keep an open mind and you have to really look at the district as a whole. And even though something may benefit a large number of students or a large number of staff or educators, I think you also have to look at the fact of, are they currently represented well in another area, or is this other group maybe more deserving of, you know, a little bit of attention or a little bit of time or a little bit of money to help that particular program get off the ground. And so I think looking at it, you know, obviously the budget has to balance. So you do have to be mindful of what might need to be cut in order to make certain programs a reality. But I think looking at the district as a whole and looking at the population of students or staff or educators that really need that particular program is a really important factor in that.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Viewers, before we begin our 4th round, remember to submit your own questions for the candidates by the link at the bottom of your screen. Questions from this survey will be answered during part 2. That is tinyurl.com/BOE Town Hall, which can be found at the bottom of your screen.
We will now move on to the fourth round of questioning. This time, each candidate will be asked one question pertaining to them specifically. You will have 60 seconds to answer.
Mr. Kalin, you have shown online support for both STEM and the arts. How do you believe that schools can maintain the balance between STEM and the arts while on campus?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the balance, really comes from allowing teachers to identify the strengths and the passions of their students and encouraging them to go and learn more about what their strengths are. And so I think there are strengths both in STEM and in the arts, and we need to be able to have robust programs that allow our students to explore depth within STEM and depth within the arts. So I guess the best way to balance it, kind of rambling here, but is to let the teachers kind of guide students and provide the opportunities in as many areas as possible of those strength and passion interests that our students have, and to the greatest extent possible, make sure we have curriculum that allows them.
Thank you, Mr. Kalin.
Thanks.
Mrs. Lysak, you've commented on the hiring crisis our district is facing. What measures do you believe the Wentzville School District should take to retain high-quality teachers and support staff?
I think the most important thing we need to do is get to the root of why teachers are leaving at a rapid pace, why we're having difficulties hiring support staff. I think that would be an excellent thing for the board to instruct the superintendent to work with human resources to get to that root cause. I'm sure that they've done exit interviews. I would be really interested to see why they are leaving. There has to be a reason. And I think that a good opportunity here would be to really look at the pay that we are providing for all of our staff. I think it was great that there was recently a base pay increase for teachers. I think that's a good start. I would like to see that, though, for all support staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lysak. Dr. Scott, you've had extensive experience in the healthcare field for over 15 years. What skills have you gained from your medical background, and how do you intend to utilize these skills on the Board of Education should you be elected?
Excellent question. There are a lot of skills that will overlap incredibly well to the Board of Education. One of the most important things is that as a nurse practitioner, as a healthcare worker, you do not work alone. You always are in collaboration. You are always communicating with others, and you always are keeping all of that for the benefit of the patient. So there's always that, that collaboration, that delegation, and as well as being an advocate for the patient. So my priority is never me. My priority is always the patient that I'm caring for. And I think that would carry over well to the board, because the priority on the board is not me. It is the students. My priority is all students. My priority is the staff and the support staff and the educators to have a really great place to work and the students to have an excellent place to learn. So I think that, the collaboration, delegation, advocacy, critical thinking, evidence-based research practices, all of those would be well on the board.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Mr. Stufko, you stated in your candidate bio that you have never worked in an educational position before. How do you plan to use your skills within the educational setting, and what can your career experiences add to the Board of Education should you be elected?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, you would have the superintendent would make recommendations to the board, and you would have the cabinet do presentations to the board based on that. And if those recommendations seem to align with student performance, we'll go forward with that. But as far as my education background goes, I don't have that, but I do have a financial background and understand the finances and how that affects the bottom line. And what I would just tell everybody is that we would rely upon, again, the recommendations from the superintendent and the cabinet members based on the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sefko. Mr. Looney, in your bio, you mentioned that inclusion and diversity are are of high importance to you. Where do you believe the district has fallen short on being inclusive, and what specific measures will you take to improve this?
So I can't really say that the district has fallen short, right? Because even today, in most of our society, we're operating under laws, systems, and policies that were created a very, very long time ago. And our world is rapidly changing. Our community here in Wentzville, more specifically, is growing robustly, exponentially. And so I think that we need to be more proactive in addressing the needs of all of the members of our community. I think that, as I always say, representation matters, right? So we need to look at what ways we can make it better for our staff, students, educators, and everybody to feel like they have a say in the path forward for our district. That's pretty much the nuts and bolts of anything involving diversity, inclusion, and equity. Just making sure that we can level the playing field so everybody has an equal opportunity to get the best out of our district.
Thank you, Mr. Looney. Director Shaper, you've been on the Board of Education for 15 years. If you are reelected, are there any specific matters you plan to address? What more do you intend to contribute to the Wentzville School District community?
One of my goals would be early childhood. We currently just have one center located in the southeastern part of our district. It is pretty much at capacity now. For every dollar we spend in early childhood, we save $7 at a later date. Our parents and teachers are part of early childhood also. That would be my number one goal, is expanding our early childhood programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Shaper. Secretary Shaper. We will now be taking a 15-minute break. In this time, the viewer questions will be selected before we move on to our final round.
Welcome back to the 2022 Board of Education Town Hall. We thank you for joining us this evening.
During the break, our student event organizers sorted through the viewer questions submitted during Part 1 and have selected 2 unique questions for each candidate, resulting in a total of 12 questions. You will each have 60 seconds to answer each question. Dr. Scott, from a student in WSD, on your campaign website, you described diversity and equity as, quote, non-negotiable. If elected, how would you strive to proactively implement this?
So they are definitely non-negotiable. Saying that they even could potentially not be a priority is instantly excluding a ton of students, and that's just not appropriate. So I think you definitely need to remember that not every student in Wentzville looks the same or has the same opportunities or learns the same way or gets to school the same way or has the same, money in the bank account. So I think keeping the fact that every student has different opportunities and needs is critical to making these decisions while on the Board of Education. I think also, that sorry, I lost my train of thought. I think that, it's again, going back to making those evidence-based decisions to keep the students, all of them, a priority. And then remembering that every student has something to offer as well. That, everybody's experience is different and has something to offer.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Mr. Looney, this is from a student in WSD. What measures will you take to make special education students feel included along with the student body of their schools? Do you feel the district does a good job of being inclusive towards minorities in special education?
It's a great question. So, again, I think this goes back to addressing the policy of our district. I think it goes back to addressing how we approach special education. Spent some time talking to a lot of support staff members and teachers in those areas. And right now, it seems like the growing need that we have is just more staff, right? We need more people, but not just bodies to throw at a problem, right? We have to make sure that those people are trained. We have to take advantage of things like our personal development days. We have to take advantage of other personal development opportunities to make sure that not only are they able to teach these students, but they know how to do that effectively and compassionately to meet every student where they are, so we can ensure that they are growing. Because, a lot of times just because someone may fit into a category doesn't mean they're always qualified to address those needs for those particular students.
Thank you, Mr. Looney. Mrs. Lysak, from a student in the Wentzville School District. Your campaign ran heavily on a platform of removing materials you deem to be explicit from being accessible to students. How will you be able to separate your personal beliefs from your decision-making for an incredibly diverse student population?
I think this really goes back to a case-by-case basis for each individual book, which really goes back to policy. I think more than anything, policies need to be consistently followed. I do understand that as an advocate for all students, that means all students. However, I never feel that sacrificing one's own morals or convictions is completely off the table. I think we all make decisions based on how we feel about a certain topic or ideology, and it's impossible to absolutely remove that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lysak. Mr. Kalin, this is from a student in the Wentzville School District. On your campaign website, you suggested increasing communication between the board and community via the creation of advisory committees made up of community members and parents. Do you think it is important for student voices to be included on these committees? And if so, how would you include them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And yes, I think student voices are important. And it would be a great avenue for students to provide their voice as a part of that committee. And so, I would be open to, asking building administrators to nominate students who are interested in serving on a committee like that, because I think what we're missing, or what we have an opportunity to do in this district that we're not doing, is really crowdsourcing innovative and good ideas. We have so much expertise in this district within our community members, with our educators, with our parents, and with our students. And we need to have a way that the board can harness that creativity and those good ideas for the betterment of the district. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kalin. Secretary Shaper, from a student in the Winsfield School District. The Winsfield School District Board of Education has come under scrutiny as of recent. What do you believe the Board of Education should do differently to ensure transparency within the community?
Well, I think we're very transparent, and through this pandemic, we've seen great division amongst our communities. Even though we're transparent, which we are, there's nothing that goes on. The only thing behind closed session is personnel, legal, and student matters. Everything else is at our board meeting in open session, and it's very transparent because it's on YouTube, all meetings. So I think we are transparent. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Shaper. Mr. Sufco, this is from Ashley, a parent in the WSD. You talk a lot about student violence being an issue in the classroom. What is your specific plan for addressing this? What ideas will you bring to the table to support teachers?
Well, it's important for everybody to recognize that as a board member, I'm not involved in how to do something. It's the what. And what I would expect is that I would go to the superintendent and request what is he going to do, or she now, to reduce the student violence and support the staff in our classrooms. And then bring those recommendations to the school board for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stufko. We will now move on to our second individual question. Mrs. Lysak, from a parent in the Winsfield School District. Do you think that we are creating a culture of acceptance and inclusion for all members of our growing community, specifically those in the LGBTQIA community?
Thank you. I believe that all students in the school district should be included. I believe that they all deserve to be well advocated for, and that no one individual group of students is more important than another. We take an oath as board members to advocate for all students, and that is exactly what I plan to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lysak. Secretary Shaper, from a student in the Winsfield School District. In August of 2020, your name appeared on the ballot in the Republican primary for the Missouri House of Representatives. After running in a partisan election, how do you plan to remain objective for your nonpartisan position on the Board of Education?
Yes, and I ran on a Republican ticket. One of my main goals is protect public education. Public education has came under attack in Jeff City the last two sessions, as far as funding and as far as monies flowing away from the public education system. Public education and the working family was my two main goals, and I ran. Now, I might say, if you want to talk about running on a Republican ticket, in 1992, I ran on the Democratic ticket. So you might say I'm a moderate, middle of the road person. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Shaper. Dr. Scott, you express on your campaign website that we've seen a rise in agenda-driven leadership from within the Winsfield School District Board of Education and an abandonment of pragmatic, evidence-based decision-making. What actions would you take to ensure that all board decisions are driven solely with the community in mind?
I think that starts with looking beyond yourself and not putting your own personal beliefs on the table at all, because it doesn't have a place there. The role of the Board of Education is to be objective, is to use and utilize well the experts that they have access to, whether that is the superintendent or the cabinet, the assistant superintendents, the teachers of the district, the support staff. So you're looking beyond yourself, and I'm not sitting up there thinking, what would I do as myself, Julie Scott? What is a board member, Julie Scott, needing to be doing for, all of the students or all of the teachers? So I think it's really utilizing the resources, and there's infinite resources available to the school board members. So really utilizing those well to make those what go into making decisions, and not any personal beliefs. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sufko, Many community members raised concerns about your active lawsuit, of which you are the plaintiff, against the very district you aim to represent and lead. Do you believe your current legal standing with the Winsville School District creates a conflict of interests?
No. We would recuse ourselves, so there's no conflict of interest. And the Winsville School District placed restrictions upon me and my wife that we believe are inappropriate, and we are taking legal action to sue so that no other parent in the school district would go through what we have gone through. And as a board member, I would ensure that no parent is treated the way that we have been treated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sefko. Mr. Looney, this is from a student in the Winsville School District. What measures will you take to make, excuse me. It appears we had a small error with the question here. Among the candidates here tonight, you were the only one here who was a part of the 2021 election cycle. How has your outlook changed since then?
Wow, that is an excellent question. So I think that in the last year, I've taken a lot of time and dug a lot deeper into what's actually happening in the school district. I've reached out to several constituency groups across the county and across the city just to kind of get the pulse of the community and what they would like to see the direction of our school district go into. Talk to educators, staff members to kind of get a feel for what it is that they actually need. So this campaign, or even my seat on the board, becomes less about me and my desires, but more about serving the community as a whole. Because again, that's all part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion that I speak to, right? But it's so much more than that that needs to be addressed within the district. And so I've just taken the time to try to find out what those things are specifically so I can be an effective board member once elected.
Thank you, Mr. Looney. Mr. Kalin, this is from a student in the WSD. The MAP and iReady tests are computerized adaptive tests that helps teachers, parents, and administrators improve learning for all students and make informed decisions to promote a child's academic growth. You have mentioned online that the district should go away with MAP tests and replace them with the iReady program. How do you believe the iReady tests will compensate for the MAP test shortcomings?
So first, I just want to kind of correct a mischaracterization. I'm not saying that we need to throw away MAP tests. MAP tests are important, and they're an important data point. But what I'm saying is that it shouldn't be the only data point that we look at when we're looking at academic success. And what I like about iReady is that it shows growth of an individual student. It can be then aggregated to growth of a class, growth of a grade level, growth of a building. And so we can use the tools that we have, that we've equipped our educators with, to see at a very granular level and a very macro level the growth of students, which I think is a better metric that shows academic performance and academic success. We want to see, in my opinion, we want to see growth as opposed to a specific data point on a specific day.
Thank you, Mr. Kalin. That concludes the final round of questioning for this evening.
Please remember to go out and vote on Thursday, April 5th. The deadline to register to vote for the upcoming election has passed, but absentee voting has begun. If you will not be able to attend the day of, we would like to thank our candidates for their time and viewers at home for joining us tonight. A special thanks to our student team who volunteered their time to make this event possible.
Each candidate's bios and email addresses can be found on the WSD website under About Our District on the Board of Education page. We encourage you to read each candidate's submitted bios to learn more about all 7 candidates. Six candidates tonight.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at WSD BOE Town Hall for all information regarding the Town Hall, recaps of tonight's event, and election updates.
Once again, please remember to go vote on April 5th. To all candidates, we wish you the best of luck. Thank you for joining us, and good night.